Hamshach Hayim Beis, Volume 1, we're in the middle of chapter 151, the middle of page 297. So there are these several chapters concluding the first type of Ilah V'ol that began at the beginning of this discourse in chapter 149. He spoke about two types of cause and effect. One cause and effect, that the cause and effect are of the same personality. That's like a branch from a tree, is the example used. The truth is the other way around. He began first with cause and effect where they're different personality. And the example we're using is intellect and emotions, moichin and midas. And the second is they're the same personality like a tree and a branch. Both were mentioned at the beginning of chapter 149. This is coming to explain the difference of how Atzilus transmits. For the purpose of Atzilus, that would be same personality, like cause and effect. So it's affecting something, but it's the same ilk, the same quality. Or affecting the world of Biyah, and that would be an Ilah V'ol of a different personality, like Moichin and Midas. So to explain it all, he began this whole discussion on in Moichin and Midas in chapter 149. He also talked about Machshava Dibur Maisa as also being of a different personality. He spoke about the letters there. We're not going to go over that. We already learned that. But then he began and said the whole thing can be understood in Avodas Hashem. Understood what can be understood? This whole relationship between intellect, comprehension, and emotions. So in chapter 150 was a long discussion of the four different ways of how his bonus, our contemplation, leads to a feeling of closeness or attraction or awe of God. But then in chapter 151 he goes back now and says, and this now going back to that all this his bonus, it's still detached in a sense from the midas, because midas and meichin are two different worlds. We discussed that at length yesterday in the class before that, at the beginning of chapter 151. How intellect and emotions, even though the feelings are an outgrowth and they're birthed by the comprehension, nevertheless they're of a different personality, and they don't really carry intellect as it is in its core essence. Its core essence, intellect, is detached from anything that is emotional. And it's objective, as we've learned. It's not excitable. Then we learned finally that it's also the Chetzenius HaMeichin and Primus HaMeichin. Chetzenius HaMeichin is already an intellect that's beginning to apply itself to an application, and Primus HaMeichin is complete absorption in an idea. And he said that's the difference between Hasog and his bonus. That was the last thing we learned. The difference in comprehending something that's pure intellect, and his bonus is already a contemplation for the purpose of bringing it to something, leading the person to a feeling and an attraction, a closeness to the divine that he is thinking of. Now, I also discussed at length what means Hergish Alaki. The bottom line is that no matter how you twist it, and one is affected by the other, there's a fundamental difference between how one senses the divine in the mind and one senses it in the heart. And again, we discussed that, so I'm not going to go over that. That's all Ilah V'ol of the first type, of different personality. Now he goes back and says, now there's the second Ilah V'ol. Eifin habeis be'ilah V'ol. So essentially you can say until where we are right now, page 297, is basically the Chamesh conclusion of a discussion that began on page 291. We spoke about Yuvan Zal Derech Mashal Mesechel Midas in the middle of beginning of chapter 149, and you get the whole Mashal of Mechon Midas, everything all the way till here, till page 297. And now he's going back to the other Ilah V'ol that he spoke about on page 291. So it's 6 pages earlier. But Eifin HaBeis V'Ilah V'ol, what's the second Eifin? Second way of Ilah V'ol, of cause and effect, Sha'ol Hurakis Pashtus Ilah, that the effect is only an extension of the cause. The example he used before was a branch in a tree, but now he's going to give an example also in Seichel, because the branch in the tree is a great example, but one example that's in the same context. Like what would be the comparison? If Moichin and Midas, intellect and emotions, are a Ilah V'ol that are of two different muhus, Muhus Nivdelis, as he calls it. What would be an example in that same paradigm of something that is more commensurate, more of the same personality? So he says, we'll understand this second type of ilaval with the transmission, with the ashpa, the communication of intelligence from a mashpia, from a transmitter to a recipient. Chassidus sometimes uses Rav and Talmud. Mashpia Makabel is broader terms, because Mashpia and Makabel can also mean a parent and a child. It can mean any type of, it could be higher Elamus and lower Elamus. It's a broader expression than Rav and Talmud. But Mashpia Makabel, essentially someone transmitting Seichel from a Mashpia, someone who's transmitting it, and Makabel the recipient. Shemashpia Lai Muhus Seichel. He's transmitting to him Muhus Seichel. In other words, what the recipient is receiving is the same thing that the teacher is giving. Not of different personality, not of different ilk. Even though that this too, like the midas, is only a reflection of the intelligence, the atzmus muhus hameichen, iyav shalashpia. So what the student is receiving is also a reflection. It's like asking a question, so to speak. I mean, it's not a question, it's just qualifying. We said the emotions also are affected by intelligence. And they're only a reflection of the intelligence. Like you said, there's only a form of makif, etc. So even though when you're teaching seichel to a student, it's also only a reflection, not the core. Because the core and the essential idea, you cannot transmit. What's really lying in the teacher's mind, the depth of it, is not transmittable, at least openly revealed. So in the parentheses he adds, besides the fact that he cannot transmit to him the essence of intelligence, like by Hiloda, you do transmit the essence, is what he's saying?
No, because it wouldn't give birth to anything.
Well, I don't know what you're saying.
Meaning that,
which is the Kamei Ba'alad, you are mashpia muhus?
You are mashpia.
Or you are mashpia muhus. Yeah, because you give birth to an actual child. Right, that's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah. You're sure about that? Because it could be, like, of course, because Hilada is, see, by midas there's a Hilada. 1 second. The reason I'm confused is, no, it's correct to say Hilada is an actual muhus, because a new child is born. It's a life. It will be an independent life. So there's a muhus that is going over. A real muhus is being created. Whereas here,
let's put the words by Hilada in parentheses.
No, I understand. In other words, when you mashpia, the Hilada, for example, it says from Etzem Me'echa'av, it goes over to the child. So it's not just a reflection. Like when a teacher speaks an idea, it's just a reflection of the idea. He's not giving him from his actual brain power. Whereas in Hilada, you're actually giving the child is getting a mind from the parents, from the father. That's Bapashtas what he means. The reason I stopped was, that's Bapashtas. Because before he gave the example for Midas, also Hilada. So that's why just a few lines earlier. So it's hard to ignore that. He said also Hilad, and he actually used it bebetin, tamala bitnam. Sheinam is like a vlad bebetin aim. But there, actually, the midah is not coming from the meichin; it's just a separate entity.
Over there, he's using it as not because it's coming from the host, because the way the child is born in the womb.
No, I understand. There he wants to actually bring it that it's a separate muhus.
Yeah.
That's why I stopped, because a few lines later, now he's using Hilada actually. Fine, I understand. I'm just thinking whether you could say the other way.
What if you take out the words
okay.
But you read it, let's say, without the words
Yeah.
It reads well, right?
I told you that. My initial, I'm stopping just because I see that right, exactly. Anyway, you cannot be mashpi the muhus hamech in the actual mind. In other words, a teacher is not giving a piece of his brain to the student. He's giving him a reflection of his idea. In birth, you are. The child is actually going to have a brain, a muhus of the mechin of the parent or parents. So in addition to that, besides that, muhus haskola, not just muhus hamechin. Also the muhus haskola, the seichel itself. We're not talking now the mechin, the brain power, the brain matter. The intelligence itself is commercial. It's like iyar shalashpia. The way the core intelligence is, by the mashpia, he can't really transmit that to commercial customer makamach. Nevertheless, that which is being transmitted, even if it's a reflection, it's not the core intelligence. It's also muhusech. It's not midas. It's not made of some other material. It is intelligence.
It's interesting when he says Hosech, like in a sense,
because by midas he writes, we read of him Hosech.
Exactly, that's exactly the point. Because there he wants to say it's the same personality, and now it's a different personality. Right. The same personality, it's just that it's a reflection, and not the core personality. By midas, it's not even it's a reflection, and also not in any way same personality. That's the point. Look, a branch of a tree is also separate from the tree. You can break it off. But it is exactly of the same material as the tree. Let's say leaves or fruit are not. When you look at a leaf of fruit, you will not see the same personality. It's not the same color, not the same material even. Just to use as an example. So a child that's born, the child is not of the same personality. We're not talking now the muhus hamech. It's a separate entity. Child can be very different than the parent. Even though the child gets muhus hamech, like he says here. But we're talking about the child as an independent entity that he spoke earlier. Here's the other way around. It's not the muhus of the thing, of the core mind or intelligence, but it's nothing else. Its personality is only an idea. An idea has been explained now from a teacher to a student in a diminished and in a reflection. Okay, good. So it's the same muhus seichel. Umahu muhus ha'ol. And what is this personality of this effect? What is this personality? So you're going to explain this, I guess, further. It's going.
So 1 second. What the mashpia actually says is only the ilah that he's saying that.
The cause is the teacher transmitting an idea, and the idea that the student is receiving is the effect of that. Now he's going further. He's dissecting. So what is the muhus of the olol? So he's dissecting it further. He's saying, and what is the personality of the effect? So at times it's explained, in some places it's explained, Shuzeu hashpa, that the olol is the hashpa, is the actual transmission. Hainu haseichel hanishpa, that means the seichel that is being transmitted. So let's say a teacher is conveying the idea that 2 + 2 is 4. Or conveying the idea that Shabbos is Einig and Yom Tov is Simcha. I'm just using an example. So there's a Seichel HaNishpa. Shezeu Vadai Rak Hashpashtu Se'il Levad. This certainly, is only an extension of the cause. Because what is the cause? The cause is an idea the teacher has. And the Hashpos HaSeichel HaNishpa is the idea that he's conveying. That's one explanation. Now there for sure, the Ilah, the effect is just an extension. It's just like you would be pouring water to someone. I have water, I pour into your cup. I have an idea, I'm sharing it with you. I'm not getting now into the reflection or not reflection, but whether it's diminished. But what you're getting is only an extension, nothing else. Well, the pomim mavur, and at times it's explained, meaning in other places or other times, sheseichel hamakabel hu ha'olol. A little differently. Not the seichel hanishpa. In other words, here's the mashpia, here's the makabel, and the seichel hanishpa is what's being transmitted, like the water I said, the idea. That the olol is actually the seichel hamakabel. So in other words, the keli. So it's the mind of the student, so to speak, the mind of the student. This is what's explained elsewhere. And when the seichel hamashpia, teifetz chila seichel hamekabel, that the intelligence, the teacher is applying himself to understand the seichel of the mekabel, because he's going to be teaching it to the student, so he's understanding his student. He understands what level he's at. So first, before he starts, he first assesses, in other words, what is teifetz. He assesses and grasps the personality of the seichel of the mekabel, because one recipient is different than another. So one recipient may need certain examples, one other are different. So that, well, if and according to his assessment and his analysis and understanding of the mekabel, that's how he transmits. That's the meaning when we say that olol, the effect is nichlal, is encompassed in the cause. In other words, we're not talking here about the seichel itself, the idea. We're talking about the way the teacher conveys it. So the teacher has to assess the student's mind and where he's at. Based on that, he transmits. When he's assessing it, the ilah has within it the olol. The olol is nichlal in the ilah. The effect, in other words, how he's going to transmit to the student is influenced by what kind of student it is, and that's all an assessment inside the mind, the seichel of the mashpia. It's a different explanation than the ilah v'olol of mashpia makabel. That's basically two different maimarim, or two different places. I would assume it's two places from that Alter Rebbe or the Rabbeim that explain two ways how you explain cause and effect with teacher and student. One is the simpler way. The first thing he says, the teacher has an idea and he's conveying the idea. The idea that he's conveying is the effect of the teacher's being the cause, his mind. The second is a little more intricate, and that is that the olol is referring to the seichel of the mekabel, meaning the status, the intelligent level of the student. The teacher, before he begins to convey, assesses that. As he's assessing it, that's how he's going to convey. So his hashpah is affected by the ilah, the olol, and that's how the olol is inside the ilah. So it's a second explanation, which obviously takes it away a little from the muhus. This first one is very clear, it's the same muhus. It's like pouring water. Doesn't really matter. It's just, I'm conveying an idea. Here, you're really talking about assessing the person and conveying the idea, so it's not pure raw seichel. Let's see where he goes with this. It's not finished. So he's saying kol zeh, but meaning both ways. This is still also muhus seichel. In other words, the first way is for sure. That's what we said, vadai. The first way is vadai. All the effect is just an extension of the cause. But here too, it's also muhus seichel. What else is? Even if you're adding this dimension that the teacher is, that the mekabel, that the seichel of the mekabel is the effect, you're also talking all in the world of seichel. You're not talking in the world of midas. You're not talking in the world of transactions. You're not talking about mashpia mekabel who's giving him something to buy or sell. You're still talking all in the domain of intelligence. That's the bottom line. It's just within it itself, two ways how cause and effect are explained. Again, this is very thorough. This is Ayin Beis, so he covers essentially all the different approaches, which is very thorough in that sense. Okay. The gam, fine.
He did it for his students in that generation.
For us too.
Yeah, but it's the same type of thing. He transmitted.
That's why I say many times here that we can rely that even if you learn something else, if you learn something a different way or that's not like this, you can rely that number one, the Rebbe Rashab knows that, and this Maimarim actually in Ayin Beis he qualifies everything. In other Maimarim, you can learn a Maimar, 5 pages, 10 pages. Clearly, it's not going to cover all the approaches. So you can discuss how one Maimar compares. Here, generally speaking, I find, he basically gets back to something and will cover it from all the angles. I mean, I can't say every angle, I'm sure this is not repeating every Maimar out there. But a lot of the fundamentals, you see right here. In other words, if he had just brought this as Ilavol, and you said, I learned another Maimar, Ilavol is the Seichel of the Makabel, not the Seichel HaNishba. Well, he covers it here, so it's
even 21st century morons could understand it.
It's all about applying yourself. Okay. Now continue. V'gam yiridas v'amshachas haseichel. So now another thing. And also the yiridas v'amshachas haseichel, which means also the descent and the transmission of the intelligence. Shemered eisei malbishay, that the teacher is carrying it down.
It's going back to the first one.
I think it's the second one actually. We'll see. Let's see.
No, but it says L'famim Mavua, not the first L'famim Mavua.
I don't know. I think it's the second one, to be honest. But let's see. I'm not sure. That when the teacher is made a he's carrying it down. Basically, he's drawing it down. Well, malbishay, and he in clothing it. Bekam levushim, in various garments. Ad sheyuvan gam letinuk, till it should be understood to the extent that it should be understood even to a child. She says, this is the level that's called the erech, the length
It's vertical.
of seichel. Yes, the vertical. Which, just for the record, we did mention this earlier, but let me just explain that. In seichel, you'll find in places it speaks about erech, rechiv, and emek. You have erech is like vertical, is like, think of it along, like the kav, a long line. That's how far it goes. So a teacher that has good erech can carry it down to many, many levels, like 3,000 examples of Shlomo Melech and so on. Rechiv is horizontal.
The breath.
Right. So it's the breadth of an idea. It's really not so much how far you can carry it down, how far it reaches, but how expansive and comprehended it is. And emek is usually sometimes chachma ben adas, but emek is depth, obviously. And depth is not just breaking it into a lot of details and comprehension, it's actual deeper qualitative understanding of the idea. It's not discussed right here. He's just mentioning that this is erech. I believe we learned this when we spoke about Nekud Kav Shetach. Something of this. So Nekud Kav is erech.
That could also mean how much did the other person understand it? Like how deep did it penetrate?
You mean the makabel?
What do you say, depth of the idea? Like
You mean the recipient or the teacher? Or the person?
the idea, how far.
That's what I meant. That's what I just said.
Where did it go for the?
In depth. It's more of a qualitative as opposed to being a hasag. Okay. So he's saying, so now also when it comes down, he's going further. I think this is part of the Lepam, the second Lepam actually, but it doesn't matter. Maybe it's both. Because right now he's talking, he established that Ilav Olol is, no matter how you explain it, whether the Olol is the idea that is being conveyed, or the Olol, the effect is the applying himself to teach it to the student a certain way based on the student's seichel, both of them it's still seichel. Now he's saying, and also the Yerida, as it comes down from teacher to student, which is now already no longer the way it is in the teacher. It's clearly a descent, and it's dressed up. It's enclosed in many garments. So you could argue, maybe it changed personality. With all this, it's still Mechus HaSeichel, it's still the personality of intelligence that is transmitted from level to level. Remember, just envision, we're going back to the interface. The Rebbe Rashab is building those connections we've been talking about. It's the whole Ayin Beis. Step by step by step. The previous Ilav Olol we talked about, Midch and Midas, is more one that's necessary to jump. How do you go from a thing that's, let's say, more divine, and you go to a place that's less divine? So you need a certain jump. That's an Ilav, but it's still cause and effect, and that's more Midch and Midas. They still influence each other. That's the whole point. These bonus can impact your feelings and so on. But in the true, full interface, you also want to have an Ilav Olol, like he's saying here, that's far closer to each other. That's why, but here too there are many steps. So in other words, there can be two ways, two parallel tracks of how something is transmitted. Atzilus for Atzilus is also going level to level, but it still remains essentially Seichel, using this example. When Atzilus goes to Biyah, it's a transmission that has a change of personalities going on, even though it's also cause and effect. So, Atzilus you could say is the tree, the branches of the tree. You can say Biyah is maybe the fruit that came off the tree, like the child, the midas, that originate from the tree and originally there, but now when they finally emerge, they're of a different type of personality. So it's just visual, it's just images, and examples to understand really two types of connection between us and higher levels, and obviously between us and each other. Like there are places where there's a but the key thing to remember is both Moichin and Midas, both Oil v'Ol, are not Yesh Ma'ayin. We're not talking here a jump that's so jump that you have an Ayin Eliki here and a Yesh suddenly. That even Moichin and Midas is not that far apart. Moichin and Midas, you could say the Midas, like the child, is a different personality, it's emotions as opposed to intellect, but it's a direct outgrowth of one or the other, and they can speak to each other. As we've stepped in detail. There's Moichin Be'etzem, there's the Moichin how it speaks to Midas, there's the Midas within the Moichin, there's the Moichin inside the Midas. There's a whole relationship going on. So we have here basically tools to create a connection. To put it more bluntly, I was speaking about, he said at the beginning of chapter Kuf Nun, he said, what do you need these bonus to bring Aviyah? Because that's the way to refine the animal soul. What does that mean? Left to our own recourse, as I said, to our own recourse and the status quo, basically, the default state. A human being is essentially materially oriented. You wake up in the morning, you're going to feel either hunger, thirst, physical needs, etc. You don't naturally just crave for spirituality, for ruchnis, for godliness. You need to work on that.
The default setting.
Right. So that means that even though your nefesh elokis is in there, but like I said, like a pilot flame, it's buried. All Aveda is trying to bring that pilot alive. You don't do that, who's going to control you? The default is going to control, and that's nefesh habamis. Because our lives, we live in a material world, and the body speaks to us all the time. Whether it's in physical needs, whether it's our senses, whether it's stimulation of what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, etc. How do we counter? How do we create a level playing field, as I said yesterday? You begin with applying yourself and say, I'm going to now learn Chassidus. Now I'm going to daven. I'm going to do a mitzvah. Right? So what are you doing? You're deliberately, intentionally doing something that not necessarily naturally you would do. You sit down, I'm now going to contemplate, and start contemplating this whole material world we learned in the previous chapter is false. Everything we worship is temporary, is made up of a murkav, it's compound, it all will die, it's yesh miyesh, it does not have any eternity to it, etc., etc. You come to Hizbonenus, as we learned at length. I'm not going through the whole Hizbonenus now, but what you're doing is you're now creating a mindset that has a challenge to the default state of the nefesh habamis' desires. As a result, and I'm just taking the best case scenario, and not that you're distracted and you're doing it right. As a result, it awakens a feeling for it. And you say, I prefer to have this eternal connection to something that's spiritual than this temporary connection to things that are going to die in a moment. Just carrying it through. And you truly connect to it, and you truly want it more and more. I'm talking about the Elokus, and it affects your midas, and it's an awakening, etc., etc. I'm not talking about how long it's going to be sustained. I'm not going through the whole picture. I'm just talking this component. So now you have a fighting chance, because now you have a counter voice that intelligently is far more powerful than the emotional pull of the nefesh habamis. However, the emotional pull of nefesh habamis should not be dismissed. It's quite powerful, not with intelligence. It's just simply because it has your default. It always knows that you're going to always come back to it. So no matter how much you can be mizbayin, it always knows you're going to get hungry, and there's going to be physical stuff that you need to deal with. So nefesh habamis is very secure because it knows you're always coming home. To me, even with all your ruchnisdik aspirations. Now, why am I saying all this? I want to go back to. So we have the Moichin is affecting Midas, and here what's happening is during this time, you are able to start somewhat controlling your Midas. Instead of it just gravitating to whatever is distracting you, whatever pulls you. We're talking again, the best case scenario is this bonus is captivating you, and as a result, it's leading you to a feeling and to emotions that you want something that's far more superior and more sublime than the material. Okay? Now, what really happened here is you've gone into the domain of Midas, but you've used Seichel Eliki, a contemplation, and a Hasaga Eliki to create right, but both Hasaga and his bonus. Yeah. But I mean here in general terms, and that Hergish Eliki that he spoke about, that you sensed it with your mind, you sensed something very, very beautiful and ethereal and divine, etc., and you've translated that into some type of midah. So you have now, you brought into the world of midah something that's from a different world of the seichel. So seichel of Elokus has brought you to a hergesh eliki in midas. Okay? That would be an example how Atzilus in Aveda affects Biyah. Like he said, that would be Erein Sof, that's Meir Bekesen, and Chacham is Bekiruv, and the Midas is Berichuk. What means Berichuk? It's how the Hergesh Aliki, you brought it down to a level that's relevant to the world where the Nefesh Habamis reigns, and so on. But there's also another Ilaval. There's how Atzilus speaks to Atzilus. And that's how, we're not talking now bringing it to another level, to another Muhus called Midas. In the world of intelligence, you also want to bring it down to lower levels. And actually, this is probably comes first. This Ilaval probably comes before the first one that I mentioned. Because first, you bring it down to levels in intelligence, and then you bring it into Midas. I just wanted to translate this into the context of the interface and the context of the whole Ayin Beis, which is why you're going to Atzilus for Atzilus, Atzilus for Biyah, which of course is going to lead us back to the Ovis Matan Torah, and how Eid HaGvul and Eid HaBli. But meanwhile, we're talking right now, one second. Yeah.
Mahus on Seichel, that's for Atzilus, right?
Yeah. Same, for sure. And also goes back to the previous Maimer. If you remember the whole Maimer with Datzcham, Medaber and Medaber. It's the same idea. Medaber is Atzilus for Atzilus. And there's Medaber for the lower levels. Yeah, we have to connect it to that too. We'll do that later. That's another Parsh. Let's master this Maimer. But that's really where it connects back. I'm just thinking. Okay, good. So now, even as it comes down and descends and is enclosed in levushim, it's still muhus ha-seichel. Va'af shezeh lamat madrega seichel ha-shayich lamidas. Now he's asking a question, and even though it's lower than the level of intelligence that's connected to midas. You heard what I just said, right? Why is it lower? Because this is already a teacher and a student. The seichel of a teacher going to a student is lower seichel to the student than the seichel in the teacher that applies to his own midas. That's what he's asking right now. It's very relevant to our whole discussion. You'll see in a second. You'll see how it's all connected, because it's all about that type of imparting. It's lower. Nevertheless, in the pure world of intelligence, it's higher. Okay, now we need to explain that. What does that mean? Is it higher or lower? But you get it intuitively, right?
No, yeah, you get it absolutely.
Okay.
You can have a student. You can have a student that's way up there with you, and maybe even superior to you. That you're teaching him something, and it stays much higher than going down to your own midas.
Right, but on the other hand, the seichel that goes down to your midas is, since it's within you, it has a quality. He didn't contradict what he said. It's basically it depends what you mean by higher. No, because I think the key thing is here the point of the world of seichel. Right. See, seichel shaykh to midas is coming from a higher place because it's your own seichel, but it's being applied now to something that's outside of the world of seichel. So being applied to application, to a feeling, to subject. Let's put it this way. I'll explain it. When a teacher is on his own, his mind is far superior to his students. But now when the teacher is thinking to himself, okay, what psak din? How am I leaning toward? I'm leaning toward chesed or gvura. Am I going to paskin? I'm giving an example to explain this. I'm going to paskin chiyuv, gvura, or zakai. Based on let's say a teacher and a student are learning together. I think this is even better. They're learning a Gemara. In the Gemara, the arguments are here, the arguments are there, arguments are there. The student obviously is getting it on his level, but on a lower level than the teacher gets it. Then the teacher says to the student, okay, now time has come for me, I have to make a ruling. We learned it together, and I have to rule now. I have to go into a courtroom, a bezdin, and make a ruling. The student says, what are you going to rule? He says, well, I'm leaning toward to be mizak, the guy merits. Chesed. So the teacher, as he's applying himself to the midas, it's coming from his higher intelligence that the student doesn't fully get. So in that sense, it's a higher seichel because it's coming from a higher seichel. But its application to midas, in the world of seichel, is now you're now talking an application. Now you're talking a schus. The student can relate to that psak. If you go to the student can give you more reasons behind the psak than the actual midah, even though the midah came from the seichel of the teacher. That's the key thing here. Because when seichel speaks to midas, it's going to another paradigm. It's going to another dimension, the personality of now application. Whereas the student may be lower than the teacher and even lower than the seichel that's applying to the midah, but in the pure realm of intelligence, he's still with him in the world of the Gemara with all the reasons and so on. So in a strange way, it's not a strange, I think it makes total sense. When you get the psak from the teacher who says you've merited, you're getting in a way a deeper intelligence than the student is getting, but you're not getting the intelligence, you're only getting the result of it. In other words, the psak has in it all the reasoning that the teacher had, that the student can only give you a taste of, and the teacher will give you the whole depth of. But on the other hand, the student has far more in the knowledge of behind the scenes of the intelligence itself, and even though he can't give you all the depth that his teacher can, but he can give you a very good understanding of why this was the psak. I'm just carrying this all the way through to really understand it. So it has both sides to it. So like when the Rambam paskins something, or there's a psak of halacha, even if a student learned the whole Gemara that the Rambam did, that psak halacha has a depth to it that a student is not going to have, because he doesn't have the intelligence of the Rambam. On the other hand, he's in the world of seichel, and the halacha at the end of the day is an application, not a reasoning. In other words, the reasons behind it, the student is in the world of seichel is higher. But in the application, the seichel that informs the application, that's higher in the seichel of shaykh the midas. The Rebbe Rashab, you gotta hand it to him, huh? And this is all still in the parentheses. So even though this Mehusa Seichel that's come down now and clothed in the student to low level, let's say a beginner student, even a child, but it's still Seichel. Whereas the Midah has changed personality. That's why it brings us back to the previous Maimer. He's connecting it. The student is Medaber Shebeseichel because he's getting Seichel. The Midas is Chai, if I recall correctly. Yeah, Midas was Chai. Yeah. In other words, the teacher and student are both speaking. They're both in the level of intelligence. It's intelligence discourse. The Midah is not in an intelligent discourse. The Midah is being informed. This is the application. This is the Chai that comes out of the Medaber, basically. V'gam yochel hashpia lo atzmus. I'm sorry, did I skip something? Yeah. Oh yeah. V'gam yochel hashpia lo atzmus haseichel. Additionally, another thing, with teacher and student as opposed to midas, he can also be mashpia atzmus haseichel. Even though initially he's only getting ha'ara, but ultimately he can give him because he's dealing with seichel. The midas can never get atzmus haseichel. The midas are not seichel. The midas are application. They're feeling, as we discussed. They never get the etzem hamoichin. Because their role is not contemplative. Their role is not understanding. Their role is feeling, experiencing.
He never used those words before that you get to atzmus haseichel. He said, and Mehus haseichel.
He didn't say it here, but he said it earlier. But I bought Inish Kaya died to the Rabbi.
Yeah, because here he says Mehus haseichel, and he says it's only ha'adas hamoichin the atzmus.
So you just heard. I asked that and I answered it. The answer is initially yeah. But technically you could mashpia, and that's why you see a student can reach the level of the teacher and even greater.
Oh, you mean Behelim original?
Yeah. What he's saying is that in the general, actual conscious transmission, it's only ha'ara.
Oh, yeah, we learned before that.
But he could. He's adding. It's true. He didn't say this before. You're correct in saying he didn't say it on this page, but now he is. He's adding and just explaining because that shows you that it's Muhusa Seichel. It's both the world of Seichel. That's why you have that a student. We learned earlier a student at age 40 can reach the Koy Inishadai to the Rabbah.
If it wouldn't be Atzvus Seichel there, it would never be able to reach.
Right.
Is that so different from Atzvus Seichel?
He doesn't distinguish here. Here there's no distinction. Look, is Gam Yochel Hashpiyah? It didn't say he is. It just could be Mashpiyah. Whereas a Midas, the Midas will never get the Atzmus HaMeichen. That's the point here. And this Ilivol, the second type, is a cause and effect in intelligence itself. The effect is of the same personality as the cause. Before, Meichen Amidis is Ilivol, not in Seichel Gufa. Seichel Amidis. And here it's in Seichel itself. That's what he's distinguished. As I said, that it's like Hashpa in the world of Seichel. So Atzilus, even the lowest levels of Atzilus, will still have the same quality as the highest levels of Atzilus. Midas is already, you're going now into another domain, using this example. Now he goes back. However, but Meichen and Midas, which means the first Ilivol, a different personality, in intelligence and emotions, the Tachas HaKavana Lohelit Muhusa Er Gam B'Midas, which is, I meant to emphasize many times like he emphasizes now. Let's not think that the point is to stay. The point in all of this is not to say, oh, let's just stay in the world of Seichel because it's higher. The purpose of it all is to bring it down to Midas, as you said earlier, because the only way that you can refine your life and your Nefesh HaBamis, etc., etc. So the ultimate purpose is to bring down the Muhusa Er also into the Midas. But he's saying now, Seichel hamata klape chesed, v'seichel hamata klape din. Hold on. It looks like he's speaking to me now about midas sheba meichen, not just. Okay, let's read it till the end, and then we'll understand. So he says, "B'meichen and midas." We learned this already. There's a seichel amata klape chesed. There's a seichel, as I said, where the teacher is starting to ready to lean toward. There's an inclination toward chesed, toward schus, toward merit, or there's the intelligence that is leaning an inclination toward din, aser. Yeah, that's the level. Yeah, but let's see where he's going with this. Shekol zeh hu muhus seichel adayin. All of this is still seichel. Because remember, when we spoke about Yisrael Saba B'Tfuna, exactly right. He said not like Yisrael Zuta, that it's midas that are mature midas being informed by mature intelligence. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about in Meichen, it's how Meichen is applying to midas. I'm not sure yet how he's going to connect it here, but let's read it and we'll see. We learned this. He's actually saying it specifically. So it's still Seichel. That's what he said. It's Seichel, but Seichel is so-called the lower dimension of Seichel. How intelligence is already applying itself. The only thing is, it's Seichel, but it's how it leans and reveals in Chesed and Gvura, which is right and left, which is toward merit or toward severity, lenient or severe. One second. Okay, let's read it till then because I'm not clear exactly the transition here. That's the chapter, by the way, about Yisrael Sab. Like we learned before, chapter 136. Let me double check. Yep.
Explaining what we learned.
Yeah. I just want to. The truth is, we learned it already in Kuf Lamed Hey. Why is he saying Kuf Lamed Vav? Okay, he started in 135, but he's referring to 136. Like we learned before in chapter 130. What's b'chlal? That even the midas shebeseichel, meaning when you're already leaning and inclining toward a particular. Remember, he said the difference between Yisrael Saba was how you incline a chachma to either of them. That was Shosik Rav. Or Tfuna, it's the Midas and Bina, which already have a saga, you already have a comprehension, and you're inclining toward a comprehension. It's not purely based on a something you could explain your inclination, whereas there you can't explain it yet. He said those the difference between Sol Sam and Tfuna, but all of it was Bechal parts of Hameichen. That's the bottom line. It's all within the structure of intelligence. Va'afilika shabab b'midas, the kosher posel. Even when it comes in midas, actually, that this is kosher or posel, prohibited, allowed or prohibited. It also has in it from the Muhus Eira Seichel, also from the core intelligence. That's the summary of the whole Arichas V'Pilpul, the whole elaborate discussion on Pilpul and Pilpul. How do you translate Pilpul? Arguments, this analysis, Pilpul Talmidim, dialogue, discussion. Hakaidim that preceded it. So in other words, even when it comes into, remember he said there, Yisrael Sabat Tfuna, that's why Chakuf Lamadov. He first said it's Chesed and Gvura. Remember, first he said it's Midas in Meichen, the inclination. Then he said it's Nehi of Abba and Nehi of Ima. What was with Nehi? How the teacher applies himself to a student, but also the application to halacha. Let me just see a second. Kuf Lamed Vav. Just a second. Let me just see something. I remember it a little differently. Okay, yeah, fine. At the bottom of page 262, that's where he said that about the Psak Halochem. Yeah, middle of chapter 135. Look at like 2/3 down the page. He said, there he says clearly. There he says. Yeah. But where was the place where he mentions that's like halachas that have the time in Bekitzer? Is that there?
But that was by Yaakov. He said that was by Yaakov.
You're right. Yeah. Page Kuflam. Yeah, page Reish Samach. 1 second.
So Yaakov is like the one that has only the halachas Bekitzer.
Yeah. So how's this stem with what he's saying here? Okay, let's see. V'gam ba psak din yesh b'zeh kol arichas that time b'svaris, and also in the psak din. Okay, I'll explain in a moment. I see he's going through all the levels here, and also in the psak din, in the ruling, it has also within it all the length and all the arichas, all the elaboration, the timing of the reasons and the svaris and the arguments. The kol zeh Muhus Seichel. All that is Muhus Seichel. Okay. He just went through every level from Yaakov, Yisrael Zuta, Yisrael Saba, and Tfuna too.
It's all parts of Meichen.
But it's not parts of Meichen there. Yaakov and Yisrael Zuta are for sure not parts of Meichen. Hold on. Let me just see something. Now, because he's looking at all this from the perspective of the Mashpia. He's not looking from the perspective of the Psak Din. Remember, he's saying all this began by saying that even as it descends, the idea descends level to level, it still retains its personality of intelligence. It's not as it applies to Midas. That's what he's saying. But the Omnam, that's what bothered me. 1 second.
Here it says, the kosher apostle. That's also very strange line, right there.
That's what I'm saying. I think so. That's why I think he means to say not midas as from the point of view of midas. It's how the Rav,
the inclination of the Rav,
is even as he's saying the word kosher apostle. That what's informing is seichel. He's not talking here the midas as midas. That's for sure not. He can't be saying that because he's saying that would contradict everything. Now he's saying it that he's saying even as it comes down to the farthest point, where all you're hearing is kosher apostle, mamash apsak halacha. Like I said, Rambam, Paskins. So that from the recipient's point of view, all he's getting is the midah, is the application. But from the teacher's point of view, it's informed by all this intelligence. That's what he's saying. For sure, that's what he's saying. I was just wondering why it was the omnum. What was the omnum?
See, all of these levels are still mahus.
I think what he wants to say, I think the omnum is what I was saying before. He wants to make the bridge closer. So seichel to seichel itself would be a teacher and a student, and they never come to psak halach. Pilpul balm. You're just discussing an idea. He wants to say now that the seichel also comes into midas. That's what he's going back now. That even the second ilavol, even the first ilavol, that have a different personality, the seichel is also informing the midas. That's what he says. Omnam, but meichin and midas. That meichin, you're saying, retains its meichin element. That exists also in the level of meichin when it's connected to midas. That's what he wants to say. Remember, we learned that the reason there's midas sheba meichin is because that allows the meichin to go into midas. So it begins first with the inclination in the mind, and that brings you to the mind informing the midas, and then there's actually intelligence in the midas, which is the ultimate kavanah. That's what he says at the bottom of this page. That's what he's adding now. He's coming back now and saying, okay, we've established two types of transmissions: atzilus for atzilus, atzilus for biyah, seichel to seichel, B to B, and B to C, right? So B to B is like atzilus to atzilus. So you're a student and a teacher and a teacher and a student. It's all the world of seichel, but that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is to come to midas. So how does that work? So he says that works. That also retains its intelligence. That's what he's adding here. That even as the teacher applies it to midas now, we're not talking about the seichel. Remember we said that when he's applying to midas, it's now a different paradigm. As opposed to seichel, it's still within the world of intelligence. Even when as it comes to midas, it's how it leans toward an inclination. It's all, wants to establish it's all still in domain of intelligence. Because the bridge, because of the interface. Because he wants Atzilus to speak to Biyah. He doesn't want Atzilus to become a separate entity and it just speaks to its own students. He wants one to...
Well, once the midas are born, then it becomes an...
No, it's true. The midah will always be a different personality, but within the teacher, he has. In other words, it's not just a teacher as a pilpul and he gives you a psak and they never can connect. The psak has within it all the intelligence, except the psak is an emotion, so it doesn't have it conscious, but it's informed by. It's for short in order to create the bridge. That's very clear here.
Traces steps back into that.
Exactly right. In other words, you want his bonus. Remember, we spoke about the bonus affecting us. You don't just want, because if you don't have that, what will happen is they'll say, "What? Okay, my life is controlled by my animal soul. It wants food, drink, other things that are material. You know what? But once a day, I have the power to go and look at this and escape into my mind, and I fly into the lofty heights. The question is, does that speak to your midas? Remember, that's why I think it's a vital line when he said you must have that it speaks to your midas. If not, the battle is not won. Then what you did basically was compartmentalized. You have your animal soul is there. Fine, you're able to push it away for a while because you enjoy chassidus, you enjoy going to the Atzilus. But then now you're in Atzilus. You want Atzilus now to come and say, you know what, let me affect your emotion. But your emotions are not intelligence. But you want them to be as close as possible to intelligence. So you have in Meichin, you have all these midas that lead you, the Meichin itself leads you to a place of emotions, to the point that the mind itself has an inclination to chesed and gvura, this you like, this you don't like, to the point that even the actual psak halacha, even the midah, is really being informed by intelligence, though, in other words, it's the farthest point you can take intelligence without it losing its personality. Right. And then it becomes a midah. So it's basically when Meichin meets midas.
It's like Atzilus encompasses all the other worlds.
Exactly right. This is a vital link here.
The Meichin
Commanding factor.
Yeah.
Now I know.
In other words, the goal is that you want to attack the Nefesh Habamis in its domain, which is the world of Midas. You want to attack feelings here. It's not just about an intellectual trip. He made it clear. He said it's not academic. He said it's a Hergish Aliki. That's why now I see it's all coming. Now you go back, you can appreciate everything he was saying.
Yeah.
He wants it to be something that becomes you. And you are controlled by your midas. You're not your intelligence. But your intelligence is the only thing that can lift you and create a level playing field, or else the midas of the Nefesh Habamis dominate. The emotions, the human emotions, the human subjectivity will dominate. The only way you can attack that is with intelligence. But it's an intelligence that you want to inform the midas. Beautiful. Because the academic world does not think like that. The academic world says, I'm a brilliant guy, don't do with my midas. What has got to do with how I behave? Don't look at what I do, look at what I teach. And in Judaism, it's the opposite. Like, Bertrand Russell said, they asked him about how he behaved unethically. He's like a professor of ethics. He could behave immorally. So he said, I teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. The Rambam says, Ezu Chacham, Chacham is nikid. Chacham is nikid. How do you know what a wise person? You see him in how he eats and drinks and deals in business, his daily activities, his mundane matters. Not just how he learns and teaches and his mind. In other words, it's the total permeation. It has to permeate and integrate. It's the integration. It's very, very clear. And it's beautiful because then Meichin has in it Midas, so makes it come closer to Midas. Because if Meichin was in its purest form, as he says here, it's detached from anything, any subject, any application. It's busy with its own, it's absorbed in ideas. It's absorbed in a higher place. The key is, how do you bring the objectivity of the mind into the subjectivity of the heart? Let's put it that way. That's the key challenge. Whoever can do that, trust me, brings Mashiach. Because that's the whole problem. How do you mix the two? We all know we can be objective at times, but when it meets the subjectivity of the heart, there's a real complicated problem. Right, that's also. The Rambam says, yeah, I always use that. It's excellent comparison. Bertrand Russell versus the Rambam. Yeah.
Who was he?
A philosopher of the last generation.
Oh, like recently?
Yeah. English. Brilliant guy. But remember, in the academic world, the mind is a detached entity. It's a computer. No. Most scientists will tell you science is amoral. Doesn't have anything to say about morality. It can tell you about nature and this. That's why you can have a scientist that's an animal. Because there's no connection. The whole point the Rebbe makes with Anochi, why Matan Torah begins with I am your God, because there's no real absolute do not murder if there's no God. Because look at the Nazis. You can justify anything in the name of science, in the name of research.
They're the most cultured nation.
So you need to have the only way to connect. But that's, you could say, Kabbalah said, okay, we need a God to make sure it's not arbitrary. But it's far deeper than that. Real intelligence has to come to an application. You can't just create two worlds, compartmentalized world. My mind is this and my heart is there. It's ultimately an integration. That's the omnam.
But maybe divine intelligence, because regular intelligence can inform the midas of what to kill.
Yeah, I agree. The divine brings into it, number one, is that...
intelligent.
No, I agree. Well, look, any smart person has to first acknowledge that I can be biased, and my mind can be taken control by my interests. If a person doesn't admit that, that's not an intelligence. Chachma Yiras Hashem is not just because you believe in God. Intelligence itself dictates that you can become biased, and if you don't have that awareness, you can't be trusted, even intelligently.
His thought process is made up of his own.
If you started telling me something, a whole idea, and then I find out later, you were paid to tell it to me, or you have some other interest and you didn't give me other facts because it's not in your interest to give it to me. Like the pharmaceutical companies, the whole thing, all research is tainted if there's a self-interest. Now, if someone qualifies and is transparent, so okay, I'll give you my argument, but you should know that I am being paid by a company to say this.
They're doing good journals.
But there's a lot of cheating. The truth is, obviously, if you don't have integrity, you don't have integrity. But my point is, real intelligence should demand integrity, because why are you not having integrity? Why are you allowing self-interest to affect you if you're so objectively intelligent? I'm saying seichel should demand objectivity. But let's not kid ourselves. Even people call themselves body seichel. They think they have no interest. Of course, everyone has interests.
A human is always,
I always say this. I've written a lot of articles. I say, I understand the accusation against religious people of faith and say, you're biased by your faith. In other words, you conclude God wants it this way, and therefore you have all your arguments going for that. But the thing is, a person who has no faith has to also be equally transparent and say, you know what, my interest is not to have a God, because with a God, with a God I can't do anything I want. Now we know that you have interest in the argument that way. So that would be so to say that a religious person is blinded because of faith, that's what they say. So I always make the argument to scientists. I say, but you're supposed to be an objective scientist. So why don't you first of all state, do you have any interest, any personal gain from having no God? Let's not kid ourselves. Of course, we all have personal gain with no God. We can do anything exactly. So if you admit that, and then say, based on that, here are my arguments. But the bottom line is, okay, so Meichen speaks to Midas. That's the key here. That's what he wants to say here. And he is adding, it's not what he said before. Before he was talking how the two different, but now he's talking how that even Meichen, so the Il v'Ol, the same personality. Now even Meichen and Midas, the Meichen speaks to the Midas. He didn't say Midas became Seichel. He's not contradicting what he said before. Midas are never going to be Seichel. They shouldn't be. That would be like saying the heart should become the brain. It's ridiculous. That's not what the goal is. You want the heart to be governed or informed by the mind, not become the mind, and not to be controlled by its own impulses and just whatever avde bafkeda nichale was the word I wanted to use. Kol hefker, yeah. So it says, but has muhused asechel hu akitzur. That's the kitzur. V'gam ba'psag din. In other words, he's saying even in Yaakov, Yisrael Zuta, and in Yaakov, there's also an impact of Meichen. That's what he's saying here. V'gam ba'psag din, which was Yaakov, yes b'zakol arichas da'atayim v'svaris, the kol zeh muhusechel. Uba'aveda. Look, Yaakov is just the psak, that's what he said, it's just the action itself. But he's made it clear, it's not just an action that's uninformed. It's informed by a whole set of ideas, except now you're focusing on the action. Look, when you do a mitzvah is not Torah. Learning Torah is a mitzvah, but a mitzvah is not Torah. When you're actually giving someone tzedakah, you're not doing limud HaTorah. Which is fine. That's what it's supposed to be. But the mitzvah has within it a whole Torah behind it. That's what he's saying. It has a whole reasoning behind it.
Which is like a midah.
Right.
And it's part of the
yeah.
It's a mitzvah.
And that's the battle. See, the Nefesh Habamis application has no seichel behind it. It's just purely what the animal wants. Uba'aveda, what's an Aveda? Hu inyan primis hamidus. This is primis hamidus. Shemer behem er hamerchem begili. So in primis hamidus now, in other words, when Meichen is really affecting the midas, so in the inner dimension of midas, there intelligence radiates in a revealed way. He's actually lifting up the midas now to a higher level. They become kehusa meichen. They become like the personality of intelligence. She'enu b'chinas hargashu b'chinas esparus, that are not in a tangible and not excitable. Like it says elsewhere. Let me finish and let's see where it's going to go. And elsewhere it explains that this is not yet true maturity. Like it explains in the Inyan of Gochin. Remember we learned this earlier. It's chapter 134. That what? The Gochin Rashbi v'noshik, that Rashbi, how do we translate Gochin? Called out. Crawled.
He bent down. He bent down on his knees.
Oh! You mean like prostrated himself? Let's see. What did he say? The Kufa Medalad. That was Yisrael. That was Yisrael Zuta.
It's at the end of
But you got down on it, huh?
It means to reflect the way intellect, yeah?
Yeah, that was where the midas are affected by the intellect. Yeah, I'll go from Reb Shimon ben Nashik. Rashbi, yeah. Okay, so there is some excitement. He kissed him, so there's an emotion. She says elsewhere it's not godless mamash. In other words, what he's saying now is now we have intelligence now shaping the midas. It's elevating them to the point of B'liyas Pilus. He's saying so. Else it explains that the way it doesn't. It's not complete maturity of the midas. It's still Gachin Ashbi, which means it still has an expression. Because if it was really without his Pilus, there wouldn't be even a kiss. There would be nothing. Yeah, some reaction. And the primary place, one second, where midas and meichen meet is the midas shebechachma. That's because there it's in the form of dveikus. It cleaves, it's connected. It's very brief here. Let's read it and then I'll explain. Even though generally the mind is dveikus, what's dveikus? We learned this earlier a bit. I explained it yesterday. Dveikus is a state where you are absorbing and you're connected to something greater than yourself. That's what dveikus is. Midas in general, you don't use the word dveikus. You can love something, but remember we said the more excited you are about something, the more outside you are of it. We spoke about ben krach and ben kfar. Because something that you're immersed in, like, if you're a person who's drinking water every day, you're not going to necessarily feel excited about it. You haven't drank water for a few weeks, God forbid, or you're thirsty, you're going to appreciate it more. You'll be much more excited. You'll run after it more. So, generally speaking, his pilus, which is the world of midas, is necessary because it brings it out. But the more deeper you go, the more connected when someone is in a state of dveikus, they are usually not in a state of dancing and singing. They're just absorbed. It's like when Rashbi says, Chad katirib is katarna.
But not a state of ecstasy.
Right. It's like Gilu B'Roda type of thing. It's like when you're in it, you're not dancing because you're not. I'm celebrating something. I'm in it. It's like it's one with you. Meich in general, when it is absorbed with something, it shouldn't be feeling itself. It shouldn't be saying, "Oh, I understand something."
It's another.
Right. So that total absorption is what dveikus is. So B'chlal, we learned it before. We learned it earlier in the chapter where he said before. But remember, he said that the true hergish halaki is in pnimius, is in the mind. Like I said, the difference between someone who sees a miracle and someone who's appreciating the depth of the Rebbe. Same moment. The miracle is far more external. It'll create a much more spilus outside, but the day afterwards is going to also dissipate. Whereas the other one is a far deeper one, but you don't see necessarily excitement, even though it's very internal. Now you need both. Yeah, I said that yesterday. Yeah, and the Alter Rebbe. And by the way,
the Alter Rebbe showed the spirals.
Correct. Look, this is not about pro or con. The truth is, the Eibishter wants a direr b'tachtenim. He wants the outer and the inner to be aligned. So he wants an inner dveikus to ultimately express itself on an outer level. So they both have a mila, but he's not getting into this, right? Right now he's talking about just simply this idea that midas don't have this dveikus. He's saying Moichin brings it into midas, pnimis hamidas. That's what he says. She'ein b'chinas hargasha b'chinas hispilus. When you're really all the way in it, you stop becoming sensing it. You just become part of it. It's like someone talking about it to someone doing it. This one talks about it, the other one is in it. Is it? It's a state of being, or it's a noun or a verb. Let's put it that way. If it's a spilus, it's usually a verb. If it's a noun, a state of being, that's what I am. She says, the ikar, this is in midas shebechachma. Even though meichin in general, not just chachma, has dveikus, nevertheless, in this when you divide the levels, in more detail, in general, it's meichin, intelligence. When you divide it, bina is more excitable, but midas shebechachma b'chinas agdus v'dveikus. And the feelings, the emotions in chachma are agdus and dveikus, which of course needs its own explanation. What means midas and chachma? Chachma is just a spark of an idea. But still, as we learned earlier, there's an inclination, could be an inclination to chesed or gvura. That's agdus and dveikus. Unity and cleaving, unity and dveikus. Absorption is the word I'm using now, but it could be also dveikus, attachment. Dveikus is very much like a flame. Here's another example. I used the example yesterday of logs and the korban mizbeach hachitzim, mizbeach pnimi. Mizbeach chitzim, there was noise, crackling, because you're cooking life, you're an animal. Mizbeach hapnimi is all keteris is quiet because it's a pnimi thing. Wherever there's more noise, as they say, what do they say? In a pushka, a ledika pushka, an empty pushka makes a lot of noise. So whenever there's an expression of something, it's usually a sign that you're outside of the experience itself. So I wanted to just use that example. I wanted to use a flame. So a flame, you'll see a flame on its own is a flame. What happens when a flame comes close to a very big torch? The flame completely gets absorbed in it. The flame no longer, you can't even see it anymore.
No longer retains its personality.
Right. And that's also a big part of this idea. Dveikus is that type of experience. It's a complete absorption into the source. And that it's not an excited. So a flame inside of its mother's source is not going to be excited. If you separate them, you'll see it'll start making all kinds. It'll try to be drawn to it. But once you're inside, it doesn't have to be drawn. It's a dveikus. Now, in Ayurveda, you could say it depends how far out you are. Look, if a person's all the way on the outside, you want them to get excited to draw closer, but you want them to draw to a place where so close that they get absorbed without getting burned and annihilated. Because there's also a disadvantage of if you go into a world of dveikus and you're not ready for it, you're going to burn up.
And that's not the kavanah. The kavanah
Right.
is to retain your personality.
It's all.
Exactly right. That's going back to this when I said the interface. You need dveikus is the ultimate goal, but you're dealing with biyah now. You're dealing with nefradim. You're dealing with individuals that are not yet ready to just enter into the mother flame.
There has to be someone that experiences the dveikus. If not, then
No, but the idea is to have both at the same time. Like the third base of music, we can't even conceive of that.
Okay. So b'pratius it's chachma, midah shebechachma. He's tying everything up together here. We're going to have to learn this and elaborate a few times. Trust me, this is not a. But then he goes on. V'chein seichel hamata klape chesed gvura mavur mokamachel. And the same thing with intelligence that inclines towards chesed, leniency, or kosher, or permissiveness, permitted, or gvura, severity. Mavur mokamachel shein midah shebechachma. Explains elsewhere that these are midah shebechachma. 1 second, he said this earlier. That's midah shebechachma. Okay. Hold up. The same thing you can understand above. That this is the inner dimension of the midas of Atzilus, not the outer. Because it says.
Because we said before, avodah we need a primus amidas.
Right. Remember, rachamecha v'chasadecha, your compassion and your chesed, your kindness, because they are forever. What does this mean? The midah shayochim ela elamus.
The olam hema. Kimei olam hema, right?
They were forever. They are from the they were from the time immemorial, from the beginning. Yeah, from forever. Well, he's going to touch what it means, kimei elam. The midah shayochim ela elamus. Here he's talking kimei elam. They are from the Welt. The midas shayachim aleihem, because midas are connected already to worlds. Yeah, because they're already connected. Midah is a relationship with something outside of. That's chitzenis midas. Although pnimis is enim shayachim aleihem, and midas atzmim datzilis.
Did we quote this pasuk before?
No.
A different pasuk with Eilam?
Yeah, there was a pasuk what you're referring to. I know what you mean. Eilam chesed yibana. Maybe that one. There was another one. I know what you mean. We will learn Zcher Rachamecha.
No, Eilam that has the same pirush, like forever.
Yeah, we did.
That's
That's not the pirush here. And Primis Einim Sheyach Melam are not connected to the worlds, and those are the midas, the core midas of Atzilus. So let me explain this, and then we'll do the summary. See, this second half, this last end of the chapter, is very dense. But let's say, let me just repeat what I said before. He's now bringing it back that how Meichen is affecting Midas, and still retains the level of Meichen. But there comes now there's another dimension, which we have not discussed till now. Do you remember, till now we've discussed that there's we spoke about Abba v'ima Eiloin, Abba v'ima Tatoin. In Meichen we spoke two levels: core intelligence and outer intelligence, as it already starts connecting to application. He's now going the other way around, that in Midas you also have two levels. You have outer Midas, which obviously are far more connected to an outside experience. You have inner Midas, which is far more connected to the intelligence. So it's where Midas meet Meichen. That's essentially what he's doing here. He's bringing them back together, but Midas and Meichen meet. Even though they're two different personalities, that's very clear. But the goal is that they meet at some point.
The inner Midas meet the outer Meichen, right?
He doesn't say that. It would be nice that way, but I think it doesn't specifically say that. It seems to be, earlier I think he said something like that. He said that Midas Sheba Meichen lead to Meichen Sheba Midas, which with the maturity of the Midas. Yeah. Because he's talking. It's Pashtus, that's the way it works. But it could be once you reach in Pnimius Midas, you may reach to another level that you didn't get initially. You know what he said? What you just said. He actually said very specifically. I want to see it. It was in the chapter about Yisrael Saba, the end there. Yeah, look at the top of page A, Samach Zayin, 267. 267.
Yes.
Look, it needs more elaboration, but I think, let me do the summary, and we'll discuss it more. We're not going anywhere.
That was about going into Meir.
I don't want to tie it all together until he finishes tying it together. It's going to come together where he's going to finish the whole subject of Yisrael Sabat Funa, because all of that, remember, the whole thing began as a discussion between Matan Torah and the Ovis, the two types of Yechudim. Right. So when he finishes that, we will get there, which is two types of unity: the new Chiddush and the one that sustains. Now we're talking here still in a world where they meet, so it's much more like the Ovis. So let's do the summary. And with all this, and nevertheless, you can say, nevertheless, after all, B'chol Zeis, yeah.
And that's right?
Yeah. B'chol Zeis, probably B'chol Zeis, you're right. Or B'chol Zeis, I'm not sure. How do you say? Beginning of the chapter is Hine B'chol Ifani Avad. Okay. Basically, B'chol Hanal, everything that we discussed, with all the contemplations, and the Chrachis Hadover, and the compelling reasons for the seichel, is still that does not illuminate or radiate in the emotion. Rakayetzim is that only the conclusion of it, only the derivative which you derive from it. Va'ikir hu hergesh alaki, and the primary driving element is the hergesh alaki, the sense of the divine. Shebemeichin hu begili hu b'midas berichel kumiyat. In the mind, it's revealed, as we discussed, and midas, it's distant and diminished. That's what the parentheses there on the top of 297. Then Yashlema, this is Eretz of Meir in Keser and Chochma Bikiruv, that's in like Meichin, and Bezod in a distance is like from a distance, emotions. Okay. Well, the midas and bispal we call them pnei muchus nivdul, and the midas are in a form of excitement, and all this is because they are a separate entity. Alkein gamma seichel shabzor raka or nivdalis. That's why the intelligence that illuminates or radiates in the midas is also a separate reflection. And in general, this is the outer dimension of Meichen. That he did not say directly in the first half of the chapter. Oh yes, he did actually. Sorry, I correct myself. Okay. Now the second and the second type of cause and effect, that the causes of the same personality as the effect. I'm sorry, that the effect is of the same personality as the cause. Like the transmission of intelligence, even though it's only a reflection, meaning a lower level, it's still from the personality of intelligence. And also the second, where it says Lapomim, even the Seichel HaMakabel, the intelligence of the recipient, is also intelligence. The same thing is with Midas Shebeseichel. That's already the inclination of the core Seichel.
Still the Muhus.
It has in it from the Muhus, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in other words, we have two elements here. The second Ilav Ol, where it's of the same personality, we have it in Meichen itself, which is teacher-student, and we have it also in Meichen and Midas, in the Midas Sheba Meichen. That's what he's saying. Whereas the first type of Ilav Ol is only the Midas outside of Meichen. Good, very good. Yeah, I didn't get that before.
Connection.
Yeah.
No way.
And Aveda, Midas Sheba Meichen, is Primis HaMidas. That they're in a state of Dvekus, they're in a state of complete cleaving, union absorption. And the primary place where that is in the Midas of Chachma. And above, it's the core in Midas of Zah that's higher than the worlds. Yeah, in Atzilus. So basically he applied the second type of Ilav Ol of the same personality now to Midas Sheba Meichen. But Midas themselves are not on that level. That's the key thing he added here. But in a way he did bring it back to Midas because he said the Psak Halachim. He's saying Midas Sheba Meichen, but in a way he's also saying that it affects Midas in some way. I guess it's the Primus HaMidas, that's what he means. We gotta study this some more. Okay, we'll stop here at the end of chapter 151. We did page 297 and 298.